So today I'm going to share six tips. Apparently I can't count. I want to share 6 tips to help you be more productive, but with a little bit of a twist. These are tips that hopefully at least one of them you haven't seen before, and that might feel a little unintuitive at first. So let's dive in. What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name's Dan Fox, and on this channel we try to think a little bit more deeply about what it means to live a life by design, but not just conceptually. We also try to dive into the practical side of things. So if that's something that sounds good to you, make sure you head on down and hit that subscribe button and tickle the notification bell. Make sure you get notified of my future videos. Now, I don't know about you, but 2020 left me feeling a bit adrift. See, the year before, I had left my 9-to-5 corporate career to become an entrepreneur, and 2020 had other plans. I managed to start not 1, but 2 businesses and totally failed to get either of them off the ground. Now, one of the things I was really struggling with during this time was feeling productive. And I realized after some reflection that part of my problem was my productivity standards were aligned to an old life I was no longer living. And so I kind of had to, break down what I needed to do different to align myself with my new goals. And that brings me to my first point. You gotta be curious and be willing to experiment. Now, I realize this is a little bit more of a conceptual tip than a practical one. I'm gonna get to the practical ones in a minute, but I think it's important to mention nonetheless, you have to be willing to do the work to figure out what works for you. What works for me, what works for your coworkers, what works for your, significant other isn't necessarily going to work for you. Plus, what worked for you last year may not work for you this year, as I found out. So you have to be willing to experiment with your processes and question them. And you also have to be willing to question advice you get from other people, me included. If anyone tells you there's one way to do anything, be extremely skeptical and make sure you experiment for yourself. Take the bits that work, toss out the bits that don't. Now, there is a dark side about experimentation that I want to mention. It can be really addictive, and you can feel like you're getting a lot done and meanwhile not being productive about anything. So make sure that you modulate your experimentation with, some common sense, and make sure that you're not just experimenting just for the sake of experimenting. A mantra I like to live by is ask better questions. And this includes me asking questions about myself and what I'm doing. Very often this looks like, asking myself why. Why am I doing the things I'm doing? Why am I trying to optimize this thing or be more productive in this way? Just make sure that you're constantly asking yourself why it is you're doing what you're doing to help keep you from experimentation scope creep, so to speak. Now, the second tip is to shrink your to-do list a lot. Now, I know this tip on its own isn't really a revolutionary tip, but advice ranges wildly from just take your to-do list and chop it in half, you'll figure out if you're missing anything later, all the way to just get rid of your to-do list entirely. I take a little bit more of a middle-of-the-road approach. That is to have what I call a must-do list. Now, the general idea behind a must-do list that makes it a little bit different from kind of a generic just delete stuff off your list is that it's a process that results in a list. And this process is great for prioritizing, especially in the short term, what it is you need to get done the next day, this upcoming week, etc. I always try to do the night before my next day. Sometimes I miss, that's okay. You can't, do everything perfectly all the time. But it's a process where I review my priorities and what needs to get done, and I pick 1 to 3 things that go on this must-do list. These are the things that I must get done the next day in order for me to be able to consider that day a success. Now, the benefits to doing this way are twofold. Like I mentioned before, it forces you to prioritize, but through this prioritization, it naturally helps you kind of redefine what success means to you in a day-to-day tangible way. The second is that it divorces the prioritization of the tasks from the actual doing of the things. So you're not trying to decide in the moment what's important. You've already made those decisions, and these are the most important things that you have to get done that day. Now, I can kind of hear you freaking out like, what about these other 85 things that I'm gonna forget about? Something I used to do before I got practice at this was I would keep kind of a generic to-do list, and I'd throw tasks on there to make sure I didn't forget about them, and then I'd kind of cull through that list and put things on my must-do list. Now, I don't use that anymore. It happens a bit more naturally, but it was really instructive for me to be able to even kind of build this habit to begin with. Also, this doesn't mean you should be inflexible. If something comes up and the can gets kicked down the road, don't be too hard on yourself. But if you develop a practice of this over time, you'll find that you'll start operating with more intention and a little more foresight, a little more planning, instead of just shoveling a bunch of stuff on this kind of never-ending dumpster fire of a to-do list. Now, if you're interested in seeing how I go through this process, let me know in the comments. Maybe I'll put together a video where I dive a little bit deeper, but for now I just wanted to cover kind of the broad suggestion, maybe give you something to think about. Now the next tip is to have a not to-do list. Now I promise that these suggestions are not all about lists. A not to-do list may sound pretty self-explanatory, but it's not the opposite of a to-do list, strictly speaking. Think of it less as a anti-to-do list and more as a category of tasks that you're not going to do no matter what. If you're a person that's actively trying to modify behaviors, a not to-do list can be a great way to do that, because it helps you be more mindful in the moment of things that you've committed to not doing, and also helps you enforce boundaries that you've decided ahead of time that you want to have. It's also important to note that this list should be short, and there are times where I do use a not to-do list, and then there are other times where I don't if I'm not actively trying to change certain behaviors. But things you might want to put on your list are things like bad habits or behaviors that you're trying to break and that you want to be more mindful of. Another one could be things that other people are responsible for. Sometimes it can be very in the moment to want to kind of take control of all the things, but having a not to-do list can help you be more mindful about kind of what's in your wheelhouse and what someone else is taking care of, so that you can kind of have the mental margin by not thinking about those things. Another thing you could put on your to-do list are things that you find yourself absent-mindedly doing, but when you look back on it later, you wish you hadn't. So one thing that I used to really struggle with is starting work before I completed my morning routine. When you work from home, it's so easy to just, peek in that office, and the next thing you know, you're answering the phone, or you're checking emails, or, you're surfing social media. And so one rule I made for myself was no phone, no internet, no email, no anything like that until I got my workout done in the morning. That way I wasn't diving right into work and 4 hours later realize, that I hadn't got done the part of my morning routine that I arguably should be doing every day. Now, again, be adaptable. This can change. There have been times where, because of the type of project I was working on, my brain functioned in a much more analytical way in the morning, and I wanted to capture that momentum. And so I would just knock out a bunch of work, and then I'd move my workout to the middle of the day. But it was a decision I made beforehand rather than just kind of accidenting into habits. All right, tip number 4 is do the hard thing first. Mark Twain famously said, "Eat a live frog first thing in the morning and nothing worse will happen to you the rest of the day." And while eating live frogs really isn't my thing, there's a lot of truth baked into that statement. Doing the hard thing first was a concept I came across in James Clear's blog. Man, say that 10 times fast. But in his blog, he's the author, by the way, of Atomic Habits, but this was before he wrote the book, and he called it stacking the pain. And he pointed to some psychological studies trying to understand phenomenons like, why do we prefer to get bad news before good news? Or why do people pay for all-inclusive vacations? Now, the gist of the idea is, psychologically speaking, we prefer that things get better over time. And we also don't enjoy it when painful experiences are drawn out or repeated over time. Now, there are a few reasons behind why doing the hard thing first, or tackling your live frogs, or stacking the pain, whatever you want to call it. There are a few kind of practical reasons why this works. The first reason is that if you do the hard thing first, you don't have it hanging over your head the whole day while you get easier stuff done. And secondly, it creates momentum. If you knock out the hard thing first, everything after that, like Mark Twain said, is going to be easier. Everything is going to seem like less of an arduous task because you already got the hard thing out of the way. Now, I know some people like to think that if you start out with easy stuff and kind of ramp your way up, that will help you create momentum, but the problem is you're working against your psychology there. And all you're doing is creating an environment while you procrastinate on the things you actually need to get done. And the third reason that tackling your hard things first works is because not only will you feel more fulfilled, but when you have smaller things left to do later on in the day, they're easier to piece around other things that might happen throughout the day that you didn't anticipate. Think about how many times your day got away from you and you look back and you're like, what happened to my day? Where did the time even go? That's a lot more likely to happen if you fill your day with busy work. You'll feel productive in the moment, but then when you reflect back on it, you realize you really didn't get done what you wanted to get done. Now, incidentally, this is also a pretty good longer term strategy. It can become a filter by which you make your decisions. Let's say you're trying to eat more healthy or lose weight or whatever it is that is going to take you a little bit of time to accomplish. If you figure out what the hardest part of that is and just dive headlong into that, the process is going to get easier and you're going to be able to comply with your own goals much better. You'll be more focused on execution instead of feeling underwhelmed about what you're not getting done. Now, my next tip here might sound like it contradicts the previous tip just a little bit, but think of it more like an if-then statement. Like, if A didn't work, then try B. So 9 times out of 10, doing the hard thing first works. But there are times where maybe you're just not feeling it, or you're just not in the zone, or there's some obstacle to overcome that you're not prepared to deal with yet that you have to take care of later. And in that case, think of this tip as more of a, if the hard thing didn't work first, then try your next priority. And the reason this works for productivity is that it gives you permission to pivot if something is just not working for you, rather than wasting a whole bunch of mental energy and time kind of beating yourself up about the thing that's not getting done. You've moved on to the next thing and you're being productive on that. Now, one caveat here is you have to be honest with yourself. It can be very easy to kind of give in and say, I don't feel like doing the hard thing, and then you're kind of right back where you started. But the reason I bring this up, and it's because it's something I struggle with, is kind of in my perfectionist brain, if I lock in that thing I need to be doing and I'm not accomplishing that, I can really feel like a failure. And so this tip is just, it's more of a mindset tip that I wish I had known about earlier on to help me kind of let go of not everything going perfectly according to plan. All right, my next tip is to introduce distraction. If you're trying to complete a creative task or do some problem solving, a little bit of distraction can actually be a good thing. Now, this was a really non-intuitive one for me. I tend to consider myself as a person who does his best work when he can do deep work. But I'd stumbled across some research that really piqued my curiosity. Again, back to the experimentation thing. And I wanted to try it out and see if it worked for me. Now, the research, and I'll stick a link down in the description in case you're interested in checking it out, but a team of researchers were studying consumer behavior, and they found that a light level of background noise increased what they called abstract thinking. Now, this level of background noise was around 70 decibels, which is about the ambience of your local coffee shop. Any more than that, and it's too distracting. Any less than that, and the consumer could just focus right through it. Now, what they realized is there's also applicability to creative processes and problem solving, because abstract processing is a hallmark of creativity and being able to solve problems creatively. You know, the kind of work where you can't be overly focused on detail, but you need to be able to make broader connections instead. After this research was published, a web app was even developed. It's called Coffitivity. I'll put a link down in the description. It's a little outdated now. You can tell it's a little old. It hasn't been updated in a while, but it still works and it's free. But if you're looking for something that's plays a little nicer with smartphones and looks a little bit more modern, check out an app called A Soft Murmur. I'll put a link for that down in the description as well. Besides being easier to say, clearly I have a problem with Coffitivity. It allows you to make your own mixes, and so you can pick your own background sounds, and I have it on my phone. Now, caveat here, being distracted is not always a good thing, obviously. If you have to do something that requires close attention to detail, this tip is not a good tip for that. This is when you need to, kind of be locked into your creative zone or do some kind of more organic problem solving. But if you're neck deep in spreadsheets or you're trying to balance your budget, keep your background noise as quiet as possible. Tip number 7, and I guess I did have 7 tips, not 6. That's why I was holding up 7 fingers before. But anyway, this next tip is take better breaks. Now, if you've done any amount of exploring productivity on the internet at all, take breaks is like on every list. But I want to dive a little bit deeper here. Now, if you're anything like me, taking breaks can be a real mindset challenge because it feels very hard to justify taking a break when you could be getting something useful done. And I know logically you need to be able to take those breaks in order to be able to do the useful things well, but it's still something I struggle with to this day. So I want to share a couple specific tips about taking breaks that help me kind of combat this mindset on a day-to-day basis. So my first kind of sub tip here is give yourself permission to take breaks. Now, what this looks like tangibly for me is I'll actually schedule breaks into my day. So that way, when I come across a break time later, well, I've already planned to take a break. I'm just following my own plan. It may seem really simple, but if I, again, kind of divorce the planning process from the execution process, I find that I get less emotionally mixed up in whether or not what I'm doing in the moment is what I should be doing. The second aspect of this is that I try to do things that are sufficiently mentally engaging. So that way I can actually kind of mentally unplug from the thing I was doing before. I can tend to get lost in my own head a little bit. And if I don't have something to kind of reframe my thinking or something new to focus on, then my head will just like never ending. I'll just be constantly focused on whatever problem it was I was just trying to solve. This is how I got into photography. It was one of those things as I started to become curious about it, I really realized how much I didn't know, which of course fired off this instinct in me that I had to learn more and really dive in. Another thing I do is motorcycle riding. It helps me really plug into the moment. When you're riding a motorcycle, you have to be really present, focus on the other cars, focus on not killing yourself. And that just helps me kind of be grounded to the present. I don't have time to think of all these other things I should be doing or wanted to be doing or whatever problems I was trying to solve. I'm just focused on the moment. And in that way, it's probably one of the most relaxing things ever, despite the fact you're not actually relaxed. It's mentally relaxing. Now, I'm not encouraging you to go out and buy a motorcycle, and if you do, make sure you learn it first. I'm just trying to give a couple examples of things that for me fall under taking quality breaks, things that are mentally engaging enough for me to actually unplug from the thing I was doing before, which is the real point I'm trying to make here. In my opinion, these are the kind of taking breaks that actually provide value. Whereas if I, just kind of crash out on the couch for an afternoon and watch some TV, I never come out of that feeling good about the time I just spent or even really feeling that relaxed. So anyway, that's just me. If watching TV is your thing, by all means, do that instead. But again, I'm trying to focus on things you might not have thought of here. Well, that's it for me today, guys. I hope you found at least one of these tips valuable. And if you did, please make sure you head on down and hit that like button. It really does help. And also, if you have any tips that you think the rest of us could benefit from, by all means, please leave them in the comment section. And who knows, maybe I'll try them. But in the meantime, I'll see you in the next video. What am I trying to say? If something comes up and they can't get I can't talk today. And I encourage you to experiment with things too, obviously. What the f am I saying? I'm just making the same points over and over. I've got cats and they're doing something right now, driving me nuts, and I can't concentrate in this video. Now, if you spend even 5 minutes to do an internet, So if you've explored the personal or professional, I can't even talk today. Like, seriously, it's like I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't use my words. What am I doing with my hands? What's all this? If you've explored, have you explored? Have you explored? Just asking.